What does it mean to die? What does it mean to live? Are we truly alive, or merely in search of true life? What if the resurrection was not a future event, but a state of consciousness to be attained? Can we truly speak of resurrection when a soul consciousness passes from the natural state to the spiritual state?
Resurrection is the passage from death to life. The Bible says that the children of the flesh are dead, and those of the promise are alive. It also reveals that it is possible to move from being a child of the flesh to being a child of the promise, and thus from a state of death to one of life. But if the transition from the state of natural soul consciousness to that of spiritual soul consciousness constitutes a step toward resurrection, it cannot, however, be considered its fulfillment.
Yet, according to the book of Revelation, the 144,000 children of the promise are called to be reborn into life.
The 144,000 beings of light descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were already considered alive under the Old Testament. The inevitable conclusion is that there are two forms of life, one relative, the other absolute.
So, might there exist a relative life and an absolute life, just as there might be a relative death and an absolute death?
The texts reveal it when one reads them in depth. When God breathed his breath into man, he created a soul consciousness, an androgynous being called Adam. Then came the separation between the spiritual part, which retained the name Adam, and the natural part, called Eve. But the serpent, symbolizing the knowledge of good and evil, deceived them. Since then, four forces have been in conflict within creation. A supraterrestrial force, the eternal principle of absolute life; an infraterrestrial force, the devil, principle of absolute death; and two terrestrial forces, Adam, bearer of relative life, and Eve, bearer of relative death.
So the true resurrection would not simply be a spiritual awakening, but the passage from absolute death to absolute life, as if the soul were passing through the unconscious, the subconscious, the natural conscious, and the spiritual conscious to reach the superconscious?
Exactly. And to understand this path, the Bible offers us a powerful image, the story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. Jacob loves Rachel, the youngest, a symbol of the spiritual soul consciousness. But he must first marry Leah, the eldest, a symbol of the natural soul consciousness. He serves 7 years for Rachel, but receives Leah, then 7 more years to finally obtain Rachel. This biblical sequence perfectly illustrates the words of the Apostle Paul. What is sown is a natural body. What is raised is a spiritual body. The spiritual does not come first, but the natural. Then the spiritual follows. The soul consciousness must first master matter before uniting with the spirit.
And once this foundation is laid, how does the great process of creation work?
We have to go back to Abraham. God tells him that his descendants will be slaves in a foreign country, Egypt. As we have already noted, biblical Egypt symbolizes the earthly, concrete, and dense plane, the theater of the incarnations of souls. This follows from the divine sentence, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever." But after 4 generations, that is to say, after having mastered the 4 lower bodies, physical, ethereal, astral, and analytical mental, they gradually rise toward the light.
But how can this descent into Egypt be reconciled with spiritual development? Isn't slavery a fall?
It is precisely the fall that allows evolution. Egypt marks the 0 point of consciousness, the moment when the soul forgets who it is. It is in this darkness that it learns to remember, to become a natural soul consciousness, before reaching the state of spiritual soul consciousness.
And after slavery, there is the desert, 40 years under the law. What role does the law play in this evolution?
The law, delivered by Moses, is a necessary step. It structures chaos, but it is not yet freedom. The people of soul consciousnesses resist, nostalgic for Egypt. As the Bible attests, the Israelites again wept and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" It is the test of transition, to leave the servitude of matter for the discipline of the spirit.
And when the law is finally accepted, has the soul consciousness reached its goal?
Not yet. The acceptance of the law is obedience, but the goal is integration. To reach the state of grace, or Christ consciousness, the law must be written in the heart, in the conscience. Concerning this, the Eternal proclaims, "Behold, the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel, after those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more, every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them."
It would therefore seem that the journey of the soul consciousness unfolds in 4 stages: ignorance of the law, resistance to the law, its acceptance, and then its integration. But what happens during this journey? Through the inner desert?
The soul consciousness faces the contradictions of the dualistic world. Moses, the Levite, receives the law, while Aaron, his brother, carves the golden calf. Thus, within the soul consciousness, the divine and the profane coexist. And it is by confronting these opposites that consciousness is elevated. Relative good and relative evil then become the 2 poles of the same engine, the one that leads from absolute evil to absolute good. This driving force is the sacred dialectic of creation, whose ultimate purpose is the resurrection of the soul consciousness, the great work of the Eternal.